So
I would.
okay, all right. Chris didn't say she was gonna be later.
No. Just the minutes, once they get approved, to make sure we sign them. No, I know the mayor was gonna be about 15 minutes late because he had another appointment at 3.
He is
But he'll
coming
be-
up.
Yeah. about
Okay.
15 minutes.
That'll be fine.
Why don't we just sign it now? So-
Okay,
Because if there has to be any changes, then we'd have to
Okay.
redo it anyway, right?
right, yeah, true. Okay, thank you.
We have a quorum though, right? So we can go forward without her?
Okay.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And we are live on YouTube whenever you're ready.
So we should go without Chris? Probably should, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it hurts.
Delay
to-
a minute, maybe.
I just heard the door too.
Okay, let's call this meeting to order, the HPC Commission, and I'd like to, Heather, if you could call the roll, please.
Sure. Usually I think Les does that.
Oh, I do that?
Oh,
Yeah,
Les,
It
could
kind
you
of threw
call
me
the
off
roll?
there.
Roybush,
Here,
Stampin,
here,
Barber, here, Mullen will be here,
we hope.
not here now.
Okay, great. On our agenda, we have the approval of minutes next. Do we have any changes, revisions, concerns? Do we have a motion to accept? So moved. I second. This is the minutes from the December 11th meeting, and they're approved. The third item was the introduction and status of a new member, but we don't have a new member at this
Yes,
point.
I just talked to the mayor about 20 minutes ago and he has no update on that yet.
Okay,
He's
so
working on it.
we're still working on that. Thank you. Hopefully we'll be at full strength of 5 people soon. Heather, the fourth one was report on the State Historic Preservation Advisory Board, and I believe you have not met again. Is
Correct.
that-
Our next meeting is Friday, January 29th at 1 p.m. I do know they will be compiling and revealing some survey results then that we had sent around the state about their historic preservation plan. So that will be an interesting meeting that I'm sure I'll have to report on next time.
Great. We'll be sure to put that on the agenda. Thank you. Okay, so into the heart of our meeting, the number 5 certified local government program, the preparation of the ordinance. Hello, Chris, welcome. Hello. We started without you. I can just report on the first item, the Planning Commission public hearing from January 6th. Les Barber and I presented, and Will, you were also there and making comments, and we had a lively discussion with the Planning Commission, and we appreciate their comments and thoughts about where we're at. We've received some comments over the last couple weeks concerning their thoughts on the ordinance, and many of them we will be talking about this afternoon. So to move on to the status of the draft ordinance, we do have some, based on some of those comments, we have some proposals for a few changes, minor, most of them minor. And I'd like to move through these as quickly as we can. Of course, we would need discussion on each of them, but I'm going to limit that discussion so that we can hopefully resolve all 11 of my suggestions that I have written here. So let's start with the number 2 on our list there. This is the introduction, and there is a proposal, I think from Earhart. Was that right, Les?
Yeah.
That we change some of the text. This is in 158.02, and the proposal is after everyday lives of its residents, to add the phrase, and in recognition of the immense efforts and investments already made in historic properties by residents of the city, and then hereby declares as a matter of public policy. So just some verbiage that I think is appropriate.
Well, I just comment very quickly that this one and the next one, in my mind, are by no means, oh, sorry. This one and the next one are by no means critical amendments, but they seemed reasonable. And if there's no particular controversy, I think we should approve them. But if there is, I would suggest we just drop them for efficiency's sake.
Okay, they're somewhat cosmetic, but I think they're nice comments to have in the
Yeah,
ordinance. Any
it's-
discussion from our,
I don't think they take away from it. I think it's
Okay.
good.
okay?
I have no
Any comment?
additional comment. no.
Okay, can we ask for a vote, please?
Okay, I'll move approval.
And do we have a second?
I'll second.
So that, this is approving 158.02. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, unanimous. Thank you. Number 3 on our agenda, 158.02, number 7 and 8A. And the suggestion is to amend this to read, facilitate reinvestment in and revitalization of designated historic districts and adjacent neighborhoods. And then this is the new part. And protect the investments already made by individual landowners in historic buildings and neighborhoods in the Bowling Green community. Also a suggestion by Earhart, I believe.
Yes,
Okay.
basically the same point in another, and I will move approval.
Second.
Okay. We have a nomination or a approval for this. Can I have a vote, please, by voice?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. That passes. Next one, listed property. Following the state or United States, this is a phrase, delete the next part, which has been listed on the U.S. National Register of Historic Places, or. And Les, you want to speak to that?
This one I think is rather critical, and it was a mistake, I think, on our part when we approved this. I don't think we ever had any intention that being on the U.S. National Register of Historic Places would automatically make you a listed property. So this was an oversight. We should simply drop that phrase.
Okay, I have no disagreement. Any discussion about that? Chris, okay. Can I have a suggestion to approve?
Make a motion that we approve.
Okay,
Second.
okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. we're we're moving ahead quickly on these. That's great. Thank you. These are mostly cosmetic, many of them. 158.05, public hearings. Proposal to delete this entire section since there are already required similar hearings from the planning commissions and from the city council. So at this point, I think we have in our ordinance 3 public hearings. Is that correct? One would be after the HPC meeting, one would be after the planning commission, and one after the city council would meet and discuss this. And Heather, I think you might have suggested to us that it might be a lot of public hearings, maybe too many. And I think that's a good point.
I think that we didn't really think about this particular issue when we included this. And in fact, my memory tells me we were even thinking of it as possibly a discretionary thing, but the way it's written, it would be mandatory. And then we would wind up with 3. And as far as I'm personally concerned, I think the hearing before the planning commission could adequately serve as the first public official open hearing on the matter, any matter that came from the HPC. And so I would support removing this. Anything else would be more complicated. We have no power to tell the planning commission not to hold open hearings. So this would be the simplest way of dealing, in my
Well, we
mind.
just have to remember that the CLG checklist, which Mr. Bevel on our Zoom call can tell us better, you have to provide for a public hearing process. So I just want to be careful. And I'm thinking, since you're the ones dealing with the actual property owners from the get-go, that the burden is more on the HPC than the planning commission. That you
So-
all hold the hearing, give the recommendation to council, and then it goes back to planning commission. And as you said, they do have the discretion to hold a public hearing or not. Now, it's been our policy for decades to always hold a public hearing because, to be consistent. So I guess I'm not sure how we address it. I just wanted to
But
bring that
but
up.
legally, they don't have to have one.
Correct.
Okay, well, the alternative then would be to leave this to the planning commission and city council to resolve. If they
Sure.
feel that 3 is too many, then
Sure.
otherwise we'll have to live with 3.
Yeah, which,
But
Still work.
if we're constrained by the Historic Preservation Society to do it, the Ohio, then we better leave it alone.
More discussion?
I would be okay with leaving it. It could be something that's altered later in the future too.
Future. Okay,
Okay, so I don't think we need a motion on
No.
that, do we? Since it hasn't
Nothing we've done.
been moved already, so that one we will just delete. By the way, I want to introduce Nathan Bevel, who is somewhere out in space, I think in Columbus. Nathan, we're delighted to have you. He's from the historic, I want to get this right. What is the official?
State Historic Preservation Office.
Thank you, Heather.
Mhm.
And we're delighted to have you here, and we will be talking with you a little bit later directly in our meeting today. But we're delighted to have you present to meet with us today. Okay, number 6, 158.06B. Add to this statement, recommendations to City Council to establish a historic district will initiate with the commission, but with input from property owners in that area of the city. The commission will work in good faith to ensure that the boundaries of a proposed historic district are drawn so that all properties and then so forth would read as is already written. And this was a suggestion from Earhart and Barber. So Wes, maybe you want to speak to that?
yes. Shuffle through all this paper. This was in response to some comments from the Planning Commission that maybe the HPC could be sort of irresponsible in some way in drawing boundary districts. So this was Will Earhart's suggestion for dealing with that possible issue. And, I'm in favor of it, except that I think that we should not say that proposals will originate with the commission. I think that violates other of our rules. I think it should maybe read recommendations to city council to establish a historic district will originate with the commission. But then I would add, but with input from property owners in that area of the city,
Yeah,
to
I
make
like
it
that.
clear that we're not going to be doing anything until we have input from the people in the proposed district. Otherwise, I think, it's a reasonable,
Sounds like they can help define the districts.
yeah, exactly.
the-
They would. I mean, as
boundary,
we've
yeah.
envisioned this happening,
No, I think that sounds good.
proposals will originate there, really, not with us. So my recommendation would be to change the word proposals at the beginning of B to recommendations to city council. And then to add after the word commission, originate with the commission, add the phrase, but with input from property owners in that area of the city.
So as worded in the document then, just,
That
Not the
rest
blue,
would be
yeah.
as
Change the
worded
blue.
here. Yeah.
Correct, yes.
And I think, and it also includes changing, adding the word "are." The boundaries of a proposed historic district are drawn. That's also an addition.
Okay.
So I will move approval. It doesn't mean we can't have discussion.
I would second it.
Okay, discussion? Okay, can we have a voice vote, please?
Aye.
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 Aye. Okay, good. We'll skip 7 for the moment. Number 8, refusal by consent of property owner. This is 158.06 F. And Gumber would propose deleting this entire clause, arguing that this situation would be rarely invoked and may cause too much controversy.
Yeah, I thought that Bob's point was a reasonable one. It's true, we can't really envision anything except possibly the windmill on Clough Street that would require such a thing if the property owner were unwilling. And so the inconsistency between this and our procedure with historic districts is probably not worth maintaining, given the lack of likelihood that this would ever arise. So I'm not opposed to removing this item.
Okay, Chris, do you have any thoughts?
Does this also, if a community member wanted to propose something that, then it wasn't the building owner, taking out this clause would that still give the community the opportunity to have a voice in that? The property owner would have to have consent.
Okay, this,
I think that's right.
Okay,
That's how I see it. It's
Yeah.
one property.
Yeah.
right.
Mhm.
Will, how are you
My
feeling?
thoughts, I'm hoping the property owners want to be in historic districts. So I think taking it out, I think would be okay. But I think just, somehow appealing to, if it is that individual property, for them to, somehow appealing to them as to why it would be advantageous for them to be in the district, for them to want to apply to be on, versus it coming from the commission and
Yeah.
say,
You must.
we want your property and
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, so,
so in other words, if the combined force of the city fathers and the public
And the
at
grant,
large were
somehow
enough
it's
to
like we
convince
do-
the owner, then
it should be appealing for them to want to be in these
Right.
districts. I mean, that's-
right.
advantageous.
Exactly. Okay, do we have a motion?
This would be to eliminate item 186.06
One,
F.
158,
158, I'm sorry,
158.06
0.06 F.
to strike that from the ordinance.
I'd make a motion that we strike that.
Okay?
Second.
You have a second? Just further discussion? Okay, we have a vote?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. So this is striked, gone. Number 9, 158.6 H. Procedure allowing a reapplication for a denied listing. And I think this is Bob Earhart again suggesting this change. Proposal to change the waiting period from 60 to 90 days. This would then read, if the proposed designation is disapproved by council, the commission may, after a period of 90 days, submit a revised version of the proposal to council for reconsideration.
The switch to 90 days was Will Earhart's proposal. The addition of the phrase, I've lost it. Or submit a revised version. That was my suggestion because the objection that came up in the planning commission was the HPC shouldn't be able to just keep coming back with the same thing over and over again. And I think we all agree with that. So by saying it has to be a revised petition, has to be 90 days rather than 60, that seems reasonable to me. I just want to point out that Will Earhart also recommended adding a lawyer-like provision, which maybe makes sense. I don't know. It's not something that I would think of, but he suggests adding, provided, however, that the commission shall act in good faith related to any such resubmittal, and council may decline to consider such resubmittal if it finds that the commission is not acting in good faith. So I have no objection myself personally to adding that language, but it seems like maybe saying that it has to be a revised proposal would take care of the issue.
I was suggesting we don't include that. The words good faith means that, you know, you can or you can't, and it's okay. But I could be persuaded either way.
I don't have any more argument to
While
make on
while
it.
we're thinking about this, Will, I called you Bob. I apologize for using your wrong first name. So we need a proposal. You're proposing that we leave in that his second part of his phrase?
No, I'm not. I'm just
Okay,
I'm just saying that I
just-
wouldn't be opposed to doing that. I can see it might help satisfy some people's idea of what might go wrong with an HPC decision. But it seems to me, again, personally, that adding the phrase, a revised proposal might take care of the issue.
I'm not sure what good faith means. You know, I get confused as a,
Yeah.
you know, what are you looking for?
I'm thinking it might have a legal meaning that
Good.
I don't know about, but I'm not sure. I did not talk to Earhart about this.
I'm just wondering if it's gonna add, if it adds too much to that, we're always wondering what exactly they might be looking for if we're coming in with a
Like something
proposal.
undefined. It's kind of
Right.
like people interpretations as to what it really meant.
exact.
Yeah.
So by not having it, then there's,
Yeah, I suppose a cynic could say, well, they could change two words and come back with the essential thing and say, hey,
It's
it's revised. This presumably would stop any future HPC from doing that sort of thing.
And at the end of the day, it's a recommendation from the HPC, so I think it's not needed.
I would propose we do not add that extra phrase and go with the first portion, the 90 days and submitting a revised version. I would agree to.
Okay, I will then move that we do that, approve just the
Yeah.
original part.
Okay.
I'll second.
Okay. Further discussion? Can we have a vote, please?
Aye.
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 Aye. The next one, 158.08A, a rewording here. This is proposed by Les Barber. No person shall diminish or make any alteration, this is the new part, to the exterior of any property within an historic overlay zone.
Again, this is not strictly speaking a necessary amendment because in our definitions, we make it clear and elsewhere that we're talking only about the exterior buildings, but the point of this would just to make it to make it more obvious,
Right.
to repeat again that we're dealing only with exteriors here in a different part of the ordinance.
Right. I'm fine with that new wording. Any objections? Okay. Can we have a motion, please?
I'd make a motion that we amend 158.08A to reword no person demolish or make any alteration to the exterior of any property within the historic overlay.
Thank you. Second?
I'll second.
Okay. Further discussion? I think maybe not. And call for a vote?
Aye.
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 Okay, 158.12 A and B, the appeals procedure. There was some discussion from Les and from Heather considering amending this to make decisions appealed directly to City Council. Currently, the ordinance reads that decisions by the Historic Preservation Commission may be appealed to the Board of Appeals or the BZA. If the HPC decides to stay with the BZA as the appeals body, consider adding the following language, and I can read that in a moment if we, you want to hear that now? Rendering a decision. The board shall limit its consideration to questions of whether the HPC adequately considered hardship issues in making its decision, and 2, whether the HPC adequately followed the standards and rules set forth in this ordinance in making its decision. So I'm going to let Heather and Les speak to that.
I'll just say I'm not in favor of changing it to City Council. I think that the Board of Zoning Appeals is a better venue than City Council for this kind of thing. But I thought that it might be wise. This is in response to at least one member of the Planning Commission who had some apparent trepidation about using the Board of Zoning Appeals. Maybe there were 2. I guess there was a second person who said it ought to be City Council. So I disagree with that person. The other person seemed concerned about maybe the cumbersomeness of, or the additional burden on the Board of Zoning Appeals. And I thought if we defined the standards that the BZA used, perhaps that would alleviate some of that person's concern. That's all.
My thoughts are, when you're talking about historic overlay zones, you're talking about zoning. You're talking about zones, R2, R3, and there's a historic zone.
Yeah.
And to me, it's part of zoning. And I could see them even coming up with separate rules or separate things within that zone, or referring it back to this ordinance totally, but it's a zone. So to me,
Yeah,
that's part of the zoning,
Yes.
and zoning's not part of the city council. I mean, they don't. It goes through the planning commission, and then they have their appeals, and then if the appeals don't work, then it goes to court. I personally would leave it with the ZBA.
Any thoughts, Heather?
Yeah, I mean, it's a mixed bag across the state of Ohio, what they do. I'm assuming Nathan Bevel could talk in more detail about that, but I know in some cases it's planning commissions that are the appeal body. In some cases, the city council, in some cases, ZBAs. So I know we talked about this a long time ago and thought ZBA seemed the most reasonable route for several reasons. But either, if you want to go with the planning commission, I don't see anything wrong with that either. But at the end of the day, it's up to city council if they end up adopting it, what they want the appeal body to be.
Just out of curiosity, Heather, moving to the second part of it is, are there other kinds of criteria that should be mentioned other than the two that I suggested here? Are those appropriate to the usual BZA actions?
Yes, I believe so. In fact, the other ordinances I looked at earlier this week didn't even go in that much detail. Because I do know City of Perrysburg uses their city council. But again, you could probably pick 10 others that don't, so.
Mhm.
Also considering from the building owner and contractor possibly that, if that's a process they're already used to in Bowling Green, an appeal through the ZBA for zoning issues, I would think it would make it more complicated for them if they feel like they have to go here for this appeal and here for.
Keeping it consistent, yeah. Okay,
Sounds like there's consensus then to leave it at.
as
with the
is,
the Board of
right.
Zoning Appeals.
Okay.
I mean, I'm just asking, sounds like.
I'm fine either way, actually, but BZA is good and it may be a little simpler, cleaner for our community.
So then the question would be, shall we add this additional language defining the grounds for the appeal or considering the appeal?
I think it sounds good.
Okay, let me read it one more time. The board, this is leaving it as the BZA, but with this additional wording. The board shall limit its consideration to questions of, number one, whether the HPC adequately considered hardship issues in making its decision. And number two, whether the HPC adequately followed the standards and rules set forth in this ordinance in making the decision. Good? Yeah. Chris? You're undecided.
No, I was just thinking through the process. If you're on the BZA, is it, how you would feel about those? And it seems
No, it's pretty much when I've served on
right.
the zoning, the ZBA, and usually that's what we were looking for was
Yep.
hardship.
I
Okay.
can't think of anything else we add to that.
Okay. So we're moving towards keeping BZA, but perhaps adding that wording.
I'd make a motion, we add the wording that you read
Okay,
into the, keeping the ZBA, but add the wording that you read.
Okay, I'll second.
okay, further discussion? May we have a vote, please?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, so let's go now to the decision about how we word the voting of the community. 158.06D reads, the community approval for, well, this is the just giving an overview, the community approval for specific historic overlay districts various percentage proposals for community support and subsequent participation in an historic district. We have 4 different suggestions to consider. First, as written currently in the CLG ordinance, simple majority. The second, as suggested by at least someone from the Planning Commission and perhaps by you, Heather, I'm not sure, was a 60% majority. Third by McComber, 67%. And we have 2 people from the Planning Commission, Betts and Spittler, who feel that it should be totally voluntary. So in other words, 100% of the community must vote in favor.
I'd like to make a comment about this issue. I've always respected Bob McCumber's point of view about issues, and I've often engaged in a kind of compromise process with him. And we have approved at least one of his other suggestions for this document. But on this issue, I have a sort of basic position that a majority vote is the right thing. I think, first of all, that it's a kind of principle in our country that we vote by majority vote on things like electing public officials, acting on referenda on important policy issues. And I don't really see why we should be using anything other than a majority vote in this case. Secondly, and maybe this is more important, I mean, we live in a community which is not like the average Ohio city or town or village. We're in a city that has a major public university. We have a 40-year history of properties in, usually the presumably historic districts of Bowling Green, properties being bought for rentals, most commonly student rentals. And I think to raise the threshold above 50% is to give the people who are owners of rental units a kind of veto power over our opportunity to create any historic district. In other words, I think we need as much help as we can get to move in the direction of historic preservation in Bowling Green. So personally, this is not an issue on which I will vote to change. That doesn't mean that the commission should agree with me. It's just my position.
Let me read something I found this is on ohiohistory.org, and its constitutional basis for effective historic preservation legislation. And I found it interesting. At the federal level, it talks about constitution things. And the state level, it says, Ohio facilitates the establishment of local preservation legislation by providing for strong home rule through which local communities can utilize their general municipal police powers to designate groups of historic and archaeological properties, usually called historic districts, or individual properties, in parentheses, sometimes referred to as landmarks, in the parentheses, as zoning overlays. This means that the legal use of the land does not change, but an additional designation of historic zone is identified. I didn't realize that there's like constitutional kind of backing for what we're doing.
Chris, I think you probably have some thoughts on this.
I guess I would be curious why 60% was suggested. Like, what's that extra 10% or 9%, I guess?
Heather
Really
may want to answer
providing-
this.
It was in our original ordinance, and I believe it's in the model ordinance from the state. So it's
Okay.
been suggested that that's a clear majority. Also to mirror maybe another example is a special improvement district downtown. in our city, you need 60% of those property owners to sign on to that additional assessment. So it just seemed like that number makes sense.
And I think
There's
some other
precedent.
cities use it,
Yes.
don't they? Some other cities in Ohio
Yes.
use it.
What percentage?
60.
60.
I can see merit to both. I mean, but to Les's point, we want to make sure, you know, that the everyday people in Bowling Green are heard, and if there are landowners that own, you know, many properties that are going to sway that vote, I don't know, you know, that aren't living in that neighborhood, that would be my concern with the higher than, well.
We, actually, Heather had some consultation with Nathan. Is it okay if I read his, Nathan, we'll come back to you personally in a moment. But it was suggested by two of the planning commission members that reluctant owners might have the opportunity of grandfathering their properties, or phasing in certain properties over a period of time, or gerrymandering, which would permit dissenting owners to opt out. So Nathan suggests that this spot zoning is a Swiss cheese model. Such a voluntary program is a weak historic preservation model, not well viewed in the eyes of the state. I know this is a sensitive issue, but I think it's a very important one. And we've been wrestling with this for some time, and have been a little bit back and forth on it. But I think Les makes a really good point. We've just, we have our elections, and it's the majority wins the election. And I see no reason why, personally, why it should be any different for a proposal like this. Certainly, if the majority votes it down, then I totally respect that. And I would hope that property owners would feel the same way if they were in the minority on that vote. Chris is kind of our expert, I think, in this data. I don't know if you have any other thoughts to share at this point.
No, nothing specific because the work I do is not, then it's kind of, you know, a different realm with, you know, Bowling Green's so unique in how its properties are used compared to our surrounding communities. So I have no objection to our ordinance being different than the ones around us because our town is land use.
I'm going to suggest that we temporarily table this until we have a little more discussion with Mr. Bevel, and then take a vote a little bit later in the meeting today. Would that be agreeable? Yes. Okay.
Sure.
So let's keep thinking about it, and we'll return to this in a moment. Those are all the amendments that were suggested on our. Chris, I just wanted to thank you for putting together that huge list.
Oh.
We did have a lot of a response, and we appreciate that. And we tried to work in several of the suggestions that were proposed to us.
Did you discuss number 7? I didn't see.
No, we didn't. Yeah, we have to do.
Did I
this.
miss number 7?
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, number 7 kind of goes along with this. That's
But
one,
it's a more technical.
right. This is 150. I'll just read this. 158.06D. Amend this to read. Oh, yes, there is a different clause in there that's important. In the case of proposed historic districts, the commission shall conduct a written survey. The written is new of all owners and properties within such a district and report the results of that survey along with its recommendations in writing to City Council. At least a simple majority of the owners choosing to respond to the written survey must agree to the creation of a district before the commission may forward a recommendation for designation.
These were also Will Earhart's suggestions for amendment.
And I think I like the idea of a written survey, and also the choosing to respond to the written survey. I think if this is important, everybody should be willing to make a response, and if they don't, then that's fine too.
I mean, we didn't hear any argument from him, but I presume that what he had in mind is that a particular owner shouldn't get a negative vote by simply not responding. That-
Right.
That there should be responses from everybody, basically, is what we want.
That's a good point. Good point. But the fact that we say simple majority, maybe we should wait until
Yeah, you're
a
postponing
little bit
that part,
later,
yeah.
and also return to that one.
Mhm.
Is that okay?
Well, I think we could act on these two parts now, but it's up to you.
Act on the
Doesn't-
first two parts of that statement without the,
Yeah, without dealing with the majority, with the
Okay.
vote percentage.
I'm fine with that. Any further discussion? Do we have a motion?
I'll motion.
I'll second.
Okay. May I have a vote, please? Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, so holding in with the simple majority, we may return to that wording. Okay, thank you. The draft of frequently asked questions handout, was there any update on that we want to discuss today? I think that can wait until perhaps our next meeting.
We might want to add items after we talk to Nathan, but I don't think.
If we have time after we talk to Nathan, we could come back to it.
Okay, let me just divert for a moment. We do have, Heather has told us that the City Council has moved their public hearing to Tuesday, February 16th at 6:30. Because the Planning Commission has not yet had a chance to make their recommendation. So that, I think what we were originally December 2nd, February 2nd, was that the date?
February 1st, I
Yeah.
believe.
February
So it's
1st.
going to
So
the 16th,
moved
Yes.
to the 16th at 6:30. That's right.
6:30 or 6:15?
6:30.
6:30?
And we do need to think about our next meeting. If the Planning Commission is meeting on February 3rd, do we want to attempt to have a meeting of our committee prior to that? Normally, our meeting would fall on the last Friday of the month, correct? The fourth Friday. So if we would want to move to a different date, I cannot meet that Friday before, by the way. Well, today is that Friday.
It's
Um,
not very far.
Yeah. We would have to scramble to make that happen. So it may not be possible. Okay. There is some concern, it was brought up by, I think by Heather, about the Clazel, one of our historic properties downtown that is now either for sale or rent. Is that true?
Yes, more of an update, yes, of
um,
that's what's going on.
which we probably have no control over or help with at this point, but
Well, I
just,
think it's an example of what was brought up at Planning Commission and then the meetings after of how there could potentially be an organization or a trust that would be interested in the future of buying properties like that to save them. So I think that's where it kind of tied in, that if you don't have that mechanism, you don't really have, the city's ability to do something like that. It's more of a private nonprofit that could do that.
I would be totally in favor of that. But we're months or years off from having that opportunity, I think. And that certainly something we want to keep in mind and maybe work towards. I'm not sure we can handle that today or in the.
I don't think you can,
in-
but
in the-
and
in
it's not a
meeting.
unique issue. It's happened in towns all over the country,
Yeah.
these old theaters.
I know it.
Let me ask Chris a question. Does the land bank that you gave us the website for, is that just in Toledo?
It's Lucas County.
Lucas,
I
we don't have a land bank. We kind of,
No, and I don't think Lucas County extends out further. But it's a local
No, those-
example, and I was just suggesting if we wanted to hear their process, I could reach out to the director, see if he'd be willing to come speak.
because at some point it'd be nice to have something like that in Wood County, because I looked at some of the properties that are for sale. And they're like historic buildings that are really unbelievable price.
They typically buy up properties that have, become delinquent in taxes and vacant. Keep them from deteriorating. Point of concern.
We know that this doesn't provide any protection, but Heather, do you know, is that building on the National Register of Historic Places? Is that one of the Main Street buildings?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, well, let's keep that in mind and brainstorm that situation down the road. Okay, I think if we could invite Nathan Bevel to join us at this point. How do we do that, Heather? You're the
He's right there.
electronic wizard. Thank you. Hello,
Hi, Nathan.
Hello.
Hello.
Good to see you. Is that Nathan there?
Yep, that's
All
Nathan.
right.
Yep, that's me.
We see John
Sanfordino.
Dino underneath your name, your picture there. So welcome. Thank you so much for spending time to be with us today, and we hope you can help us on our quest. We've been doing this for a couple of years, as you know, and we're continuing that quest. Maybe we could just give you a moment or two, if you could say a few words about what you do and about the state's organization.
Okay. Thank you for having me. Some of you were probably there the last time I was there in Bowling Green. We did the presentation in the courthouse. So I work with the State Historic Preservation Office, which in Ohio, we are the only nonprofit SHPO actually in the country now. And so we oversee all the preservation programs in the state, from the Historic Preservation Plan, which Heather's involved with, and I actually head that up. It's also the Certified Local Government Program, Historic Rehabilitation Tax Credits, and the 106 program. Turn on an extra light there. And so I work with all of those, or I mainly work with tax credit and with CLG. And so that's kind of the overview of the office. I do tax credits and I do local government work. It's my primary responsibilities in the state plan. So 3.
So we hopefully have some questions and we can have a dialogue with Nathan. Who would like to?
We submitted some questions, and we could start by inviting him to respond to as many of them as he cares to. Could be a start.
Oh, I have to find them then.
Same with these.
Yeah, we can just read them. Yep.
Yeah, that'll work. Otherwise it'll be.
Okay, so should I read okay, I'll read the first one. We wondered what the enabling legislation at the state and national levels has to say, if anything, about the issue of including properties of opposed owners within historic districts. Is that addressed?
The issue with Ohio is using the explicit language of enabling. In the case of Ohio, each community is devising its own enabling legislation. Typically, if you're referring to something federal and state, it's something that doesn't apply to a home rule state like Ohio. So it is enabling legislation, but at the state level, it has a little bit of a different meaning. The model ordinance, it's however the city needs to process that for designation. Percentages can be whatever it is. I think Heather might actually have either that was the really old version of the model ordinance or that was someone else, because I don't recall having the 60%. I actually have communities that will pass it over owner objection. That they will actually say, it is in our public interest, this property is that important, that they have a process that will go over owner objection. The hope being, as always, that you would never antagonistically be doing that. The hope and the goal is always to get the majority of people involved and on board with the benefits of what that program is offering them. But in some cases, some communities have decided that, we haven't issues and that they'll pass it over owner objection, even if they did have over 50% objecting. But again, that just makes the process a lot more difficult. The goal is to get the bulk in. Something that does need to be considered also by the city, and this is something that's particularly important for any college town and any town with a strong or large rental population, is how is that counted? How is that counted for zoning purposes? How is it counted for any other change? Because if I own 15 buildings in downtown, does that mean I have 15 votes? Or does that mean I have one vote as one property owner? Making sure that is taken into account, because again, in many of these cases, one person's owning multiple properties. And so making sure that you have that hashed out with the local government, or, what the city needs to have, what they're usually do put together so they know how to address that. But you can do a simple majority. That's usually preferable because it actually that gets the most people in.
Is there any case law that bears on this issue directly that you know of?
Not case law, no.
No, okay.
I mean, what it is actually, you were mentioning Supreme Court, you're mentioning how things go at the federal level. The main Supreme Court case that ever actually hit on local designation and then design review is the Penn Central case, which is 1976, I think. Which is they after the demolition of Penn Station, the same company that owned it was also going to demolish Grand Central Terminal, and then they were going to do a cantilever building over top of it. However, in the meantime, the city had designated it as a landmark, actually without objection, oddly enough, and then prevented them from making the alterations that they were looking to make. And basically, that was a Supreme Court case that said, so long as it's not a taking of private property, and so long as due process involved, which is making sure that they actually have the hearing that is part of the designation and the design review process, then that's part of local government's authority to do, like any other kind of zoning, like any other kind of decision related to that.
Okay, thank you.
And I apologize, I have a creaky chair.
What is the value of having districts or listed properties entirely voluntary?
What was the last word?
Sorry, I didn't talk into my microphone. What is the value of having districts or listed properties entirely voluntary?
I really don't know of any benefits. One of the big issues I see with a voluntary situation is it's not offering the protection that comes with having, for example, a historic district. If I spend multiple millions of dollars doing a rehabilitation of my building and my neighbor decides that they want to tear it down and put up a pole barn, then my property value, my investment isn't protected by them having the same requirements that I have, or at least the same minimum that I have. As some of your material says, you're not required to do anything outside of maintenance that would be code enforcement related requirements anyway. Once you're in the district, it's not really going to do anything. It's just guiding new development. Really, that's what the goal of the ordinance is. It's guiding that development. So voluntary, I mean, the question, it brings up a lot more questions than it's worth. For example, if the property sells, does that mean that that person then can go in and just revoke that? Or, how is that, how would that necessarily be fair to each successive owner if it's entirely a voluntary process? So I think it begs a lot more questions that are more problematic than, trying to get that support and then getting that overlay passed. And in districts, again, it's the same issue of my neighbor doesn't have to follow this. It gets rid of that shared burden of protecting the historic character.
Okay, can contributing properties be exempt from the designation? What is the value of being included in the designation?
So really what usually happens with non-contributing properties is they can't do something worse. So if you have, for example, a 1980s bank that's in the middle of the district, which I've seen that in plenty of cases, you're not going to tell them that they have to go in and make an alteration to make it look like a 19th century Italianate. Or they're not going to go in, and if they're getting, say they want to do a small addition on the rear, they're going to have flexibility so long as it's on their property and they're not changed. It's not a big change that's going to impact the district. There is far more flexibility that can be granted to those. The issue you would have is, what if it's one type of building, a small building, it's not a non-contributing, just outside the period of significance, so it's not really that great. And they want to put in a new gas station, for example, which I know zoning technically would probably handle that more than this. But from a design standpoint, how is that going to stop them? That's going to be a significant change. It's going to make it worse in the district. It's going to be more visually disruptive to the historic character. And so that's where that's coming from. I mean, there is the flexibility, if someone decides they want to do the next Frank Gehry style building downtown and you have a non-contributing building and they can put it in, then you can make that call. But essentially it's just holding that bar that it's just not going to make something that gets worse. But usually when I deal with the commission, so long as something is not incredibly crazy and outside the lines, then there's a lot of flexibility with non-contributing buildings.
Good. We've kind of hit the zoning board of appeals, but what is your experience for the typical appeals? What do you recommend?
There's usually usually three different four. It's either city council, board of zoning appeals if the municipality is big enough for board of zoning appeals, planning commission, and then I have some that just go straight to courts. But the ones that go to courts, usually that's where the only place you have to appeal. And usually the same thing with those that go straight to council for appeal. The plus of having an intermediary board is you hopefully have members who are more attuned to the issues locally related to that subject. So, for example, zoning. And hopefully it's not quite as political as it no doubt would be if it goes to council. Usually that is sometimes a concern that it's once it gets to council, it's who can make the best case. If it's or if they can say, well, I'll run against you if you do this kind of a situation. It kind of gets rid of that first layer. But I have actually seen it in all the different ways. So usually it's whatever the typical process is for appealing that kind of a decision.
So we know this is true with some of our community, and we're talking with them about this problem. But how do you convince someone of the benefits who see this as taking away their private property rights?
Well, one of the big issues, and this actually comes in related to cost also, what are they doing that's going to be stopped by the ordinance? Or if you're looking at this from a cost perspective, what are they doing that isn't going to meet that ordinance? What's the actual issue? What is the, from an ideological standpoint, you're in a community, there's laws and there's regulations that go with any kinds of property. You already have some issue, and there's hearings to make sure it's not a taking of private property. There's not really, some people, it is just an ideological issue. For those that it's a taking, I mean, that's part of the point of doing a district, is it's spreading that burden of maintaining historic character to others in the community. It's a community-wide issue. It's not just me as individual property owner taking the brunt of doing some of this work. So there is that aspect of what's the issue, but then again, when it gets to what are they planning, what are they doing, or that is going to be so adversely affected by that local ordinance. Are they planning to do a demolition and then building in, taking down one of the large buildings surrounding the square and putting in 2 or 3 houses so they can maximize? Is that what they're planning? Or is it just, I want to rip out every single window because I don't like them and put in something new? What's the question? What's the issue? Why is that objection there?
I think we have, we've talked about windows and keeping in sort of the same historic vein without being too strict about it. We've made a lot of provision.
It's always windows. You all are muted.
How's that?
There we go.
Okay, great.
It
I was
froze up.
like, is it mine? I know it's like my computer's been an issue lately.
So Nathan, I was just mentioning that in the city of Deerfield, Illinois, there's a big problem of tear downs and rebuilding of brand new homes. And I think there's always that potential as well in protecting a community that's wanting to preserve some of their history. So, I mean, that's one concern that I would have in proceeding and trying to help promote the CLG.
John, can I also just mention,
Yeah,
because this says, people say this will deter developers. And this week alone, I have had discussions in my job with developers who want to pursue, historic overlay zones or historic registry nominations because they see that as an asset. So I think
having an asset of a historic home.
either a national register or
Having that.
a local designation.
Right.
So I think you're always going to have some pushback with somebody, but just like I said, just this week alone, I had 4 meetings with people about, and it's not in Bowling Green specifically, but just I think there are developers out there who they actually find that really appealing.
Chris, can you tell Nathan what your job is, what you're doing?
Oh yeah, Nathan and I've communicated before just in my job, but yeah, I'm a architect with Thomas Porter Architects in Toledo, but we do tax credit projects, and we're currently working on some local designations in Toledo and some national registries as well. So, and we've been those happened by those developers approaching us and saying, "Hey, we want to do this." So, I just wanted to note that I'm sure there's somebody who might have a objection, but I hear a lot of people, a lot of developers who are excited by that.
Great. Good to hear that.
And something to always consider, especially this being in a rental town, if that building is listed on the National Register, so long as it's not owner occupied, they're eligible for tax credits to rehab their buildings. So if you have a property owner that, and tax credit is going to be probably the more strict interpretation of the state. Well, not necessarily strict. It's strict in the sense that tax credits we're looking at interior too. That's usually where, oh, I don't know if I can handle this comes in. But, that's something especially to consider is these people that are in this area, they're wanting to do the work. They want to, they want to do something to the building. They're actually in a really good position to potentially do a tax credit to rehab the building, which is kind of a win-win. They, update the finishes, which, usually helps in income. But then they also, if they're doing the tax credit, it means it's going to be, we're going to push it for the best work that we can. So there are already financial incentives for income producing properties.
So there has also been a question about if those incentives are worth the trouble.
That's a lot, you have to make that financial case for yourself. That really depends on what your circumstances are. If a lot of your work is rental, it might be. And we know a lot of people that do their own applications. And, there's a few people that have been down in Newark, for example, that they kind of got hit by it. They really enjoyed doing it and they wanted to do more of that. But yes, there are always people who are like, that's a lot more paperwork than I ever really want to do. I want to, have they have a masonry building and they want every single wall exposed, and it was always plastered. Well, that may not fit in with the tax credit, and it's understanding whether that is what you want to do or not.
Nathan, it's Heather. I don't want to miss the fact, though, that you can get a federal tax historic credit while you're on the register, but locally, without being a CLG, they cannot take advantage of the state historical tax credit, correct?
Oh, they can. Yes. No, they
Okay.
can. So
Okay.
the National Register is the trump card. National Register gets you into both.
Okay. Thank you.
However, let's just take around the courthouse. I think it is listed on the National Register.
Courthouse
As-
is, yes.
But so take the buildings around the courthouse then. That if they are not listed, the city could designate them as historic. Then they would be eligible for the state tax credit. State only, though. However, what we typically see is if you have a community that's a CLG, and I know Toledo usually takes advantage of this. If you're a CLG, they'll designate the building while they're working on the National Register. Because for state tax credit, you have to be historic upfront. You have to be either listed or locally designated. For the federal tax credit, you have to be listed on the National Register by the placed in service date. So usually that's the end of the project. So this helps close that gap. So you could apply up front for the state tax credit, start the project, and finish up, potentially with your consultant or whomever and getting that National Register done. And then you can be working on that project during that time. Otherwise, you have to wait until that National Register nomination is done to even apply for the tax credit. So for example, take Urbana or Bell Fountain. They're not a CLG. They would have to wait until their National Register nomination was done, signed by the keeper of the National Register before they could apply for the state tax credit.
This is what
And that's
you,
a difference
what you
of
thought, yeah.
18 months for a national register as opposed to 4 months for a local designation.
If that, depending upon what the local process is.
Right.
Are you aware of communities who are a CLG but have no listed properties or historic districts?
I think I think everyone's had at least one. But usually because sometimes they're under the gun for getting it in to do a tax credit project. I've actually had a few that'll do that they're working on the process. So I was actually just talking to a community earlier today. They're working on the process. They haven't gotten it done yet. And they're looking at a district. But they have a tax credit that's coming up. And so they're probably going to look to do the quick. So they might individually designate that and then start a larger process. And they actually are doing both National Register and local, I think. Hopefully. I've got my fingers crossed.
I believe you said this
So-
before, Nathan, that Kent did theirs very quickly because they had a few transformational projects in their downtown.
Yeah. So if you know the Kent Hotel that's it's actually near the edge of the downtown, near where the kind of campus gateway area starts.
Yes.
That was the impetus for them. Actually, that was why Akron got in. They had one or two buildings that needed a tax credit. And so they got in for that. Actually, I can probably name about almost 10 communities, I think, that probably have done that at some point in time or another.
Any questions? Are the tax credits for 1 year only?
Tax credits, it's actually more for an amount of money than for an amount. So a tax credit is once you've calculated your taxes at the end of the year, the credit then comes out of what those taxes, that tax owed is. So if I do my taxes and I owe $100 to the federal government, then that'll wipe out that $100 liability that I owe the government. The state tax credit is all at once. So once you're done the project, get it certified, the part 3 of that application done, then you're eligible for the tax credit. You can start using it for that tax year. I think it is carried forwardable. It can be carried forwards, or under certain circumstances, it can actually also be a refund. That's state only. And then for the federal, under the 2017 amendments, we still haven't gotten 100% of our guidance from like the IRS on this. It's actually prorated now for 5 years at least, that the percentage of your expenses will then be sent back out. It will be then available as a credit. So the state tax credit is 25% of your qualified rehab, and the federal is 20% of your qualified rehab. The state is competitive and it's capped at $5 million a project, which, sounds like a lot of money, but we get a lot that hit that no matter what. And in other cases, it's for the federal, there is no cap. It's not competitive. You could come in tomorrow for it, and it's 20%.
Could you talk a little bit about foundations? And because some owners talk about the expenses of trying to do some of the rehabilitation, or there's been some suggestions like maybe even buying property from owners. Could you talk about the experience you've seen in the different cities on foundations?
Usually the foundations, when I'm dealing with them, are, for Ohio, normally it's a nonprofit institution, and if they're buying it, it's usually for a house museum or something. I haven't seen a lot of the foundational doing like tax credits and everything else, usually because 9 times out of 10, the programs that I've worked with and seen are using other states' residential tax credits. I used to work down in Georgia, and they have 2 usual models down there, which is the Savannah model, which is where they buy it, write up the tax credit application, and then sell it with that package. So it actually sells the design essentially and the building. The organization, the foundation I used to work for, Historic Macon, they actually did the full rehab. They actually bought it, applied for the state tax credit and the state tax abatement on the residential property, did the rehab, and then they're able to transfer it then to the new owner. But Ohio and the federal government does not have a residential rehab tax credit, though.
Have you seen any cities like Toledo has the Toledo Community Foundation that gives out annual grants, like people submit applications for grants? Have you seen those any?
I have seen that. So actually, the city of Montgomery, by itself, actually did. I think they just had like a budget surplus or something. They actually did a grant to anyone who would do programs that would meet that requirement. I've also seen communities in helping with that waive fees for certain projects. So Barberton wanted people to do some painting. That they had a lot of signs, a lot of just odds and ends. And so they said, if you follow XYZ Paints color schemes, you don't have to come into us. And so, ended up saving at least some time and some paperwork and some, a few bucks. As for foundations, I don't know too many that will necessarily lend out the money to do the rehab. In Ohio, I know there's actually a program down in New Orleans with the Preservation Resource Center that has done, like, they actually have a nonprofit. That nonprofit actually gives out grants to do rehab to meet requirements of the commission.
Thank you.
No.
Just one final question. We, at least Chris had mentioned in one of your memos that there's really a historic districts tend to have better property values than they would have if there wasn't a CLG. Can you speak to that, and if that's true?
Generally speaking, what happens is it's that protection of investment, that if I invest money that is in the rehab of my building or repair of my building, that is somewhat guided by the local design review commission, HBC, then it means usually that work is going to be done to a better standard. Usually that's attracting more people who are interested in protecting their properties. Someone who just really wants a suburban McMansion will then look at a suburban McMansion in suburbia as opposed to trying to, shoehorn one into a local historic district because there's those requirements. But generally speaking, it's people are taking more care of their properties, and usually they are investing more, and they're also doing that better care, which then ends up increasing that property value. And that is an overtime thing, and it's not always a silver bullet that's going to take care of everything. I know plenty of historic districts that still have big issues. But by and large, it's at least helping to raise that bar for development and protecting that investment, which study after study that I've seen, and Chris, I saw your post on the Historic Preservation Facebook group, and I'm like, gee, I wonder what state she's talking to.
We have a lot of academics here. I wanted to provide peer-reviewed information. But
and that is something we're looking to do, is do an economic benefit. The only problem usually is that ends up being a little bit more, how is the tax credit helped? But it's also looking at that from the other perspective of what the actual local designation. Again, it's part of the issue is because I worked there and went to school there. I worked with a community in Georgia, though, that they did do that study. They actually funded it themselves. The local community foundation did it. And they did a look at property values for 3 different groups. They took a regular district who had, similar property values. They had a National Register listed district that was similar property values. And then they had a locally designated and National Register listed district. And they kind of created the control, and they had all the property values, and they monitored it and went back and looked at the data from a while ago, because the auditor kept all that info, and they found that the non-designated nothing control district, it would just rise and fall with the market value. And they found that the National Register had a more upward trend. It kind of muted any ups and downs. And they found that the local district actually just kept going up. It actually was a general upward trend. But a lot of that was done pre-2008. So I don't know if the dynamics have changed. But I would assume not, that, still that's promoting a lot of investment.
Okay, we should actually be mentioning our names every time we do this. So I'm going to just tell you at the end of our meeting here, I'm John Sampin. I've been a resident of Bowling Green for 44 years. And what I have seen is a steady change of people choosing not to live in Bowling Green, but to move to Perrysburg or to Ann Arbor or other communities nearby. And that concerns me a lot. And I think perhaps, and certainly what I'm hearing from my colleagues, that if we have the CLG and the historic districts, that may change. That may change, I don't know, dramatically, but I hope it will become a community where people want to stay in Bowling Green and not commute in to work at the university. So that's my hope. And that's one of the things I think the CLG can really speak to in the future.
And I know this is Chris Mallon, by the way. I know I've mentioned this before, and I don't have a specific study I can, point to at the moment, but surveys have found millennials prefer historic communities. And I think that's important for a place like Bowling Green that has the opportunity to entice the students to stay. We don't want that brain drain. And if that's an incentive for them to stay, I think that's
Right.
important.
Nathan, thank you very much. We invite you to please stay as long as you can. We'll just finish up some other loose pieces of business here. But we really appreciate your being here, and we hope we can continue to rely on your expertise and your advice.
Sure
so
thing. Would you want me to stay online and then send you
That'd be
back a
great.
little after? Okay.
That'd be great.
But I'll go back to mute.
Okay, thank
Thanks,
you.
Nathan.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so back to our dilemma of the percentage of historic district voting. We've had a lot of discussion about this. And we have some more. Will, how are you feeling at this point?
I would leave it the majority.
Okay. Pretty definitive, right? Good. Chris, are you wanting to argue for a different point?
No, but I did like Nathan's comment that we need to consider how these votes are counted. And I can't remember if that was already discussed, if it's per building, per owner.
I think we've resolved that, right, Les?
Yeah, the city attorney has reviewed it and said that as written, it's the owner. It's a vote by
Per-
the owners per owner.
Okay.
I think I know how you are leaning.
Yeah,
Les.
I announced that.
You've already announced it. We know that emphatically. And I would agree. I'm definitely thinking that the majority it would be my preference. So I think at this point we should have a vote on the committee. We need a motion, please.
I make a motion that we leave it at majority.
Okay. A second?
Second,
Further discussion? Okay, call for a vote.
Aye.
aye.
Aye. Now, having said that, we do have commentary from several people that have expressed their disinterest, and I'm wondering if we need to, in that majority vote, do we need a response to them? Perhaps not.
Well,
I
we've
guess-
talked about sending some kind of transmittal or cover letter with
With the planning,
our
to the planning,
amendments, and I think
to the planning commission.
to the planning commission,
Okay,
yeah, so
and-
that
and
would,
and perhaps that would be
maybe that will cover it.
explanatory. Okay, good. Other business. I think that was all the amendments and changes. Didn't we cover, did we get it all, Heather?
I think so, yeah.
I think so.
So Heather will be, and we totally appreciate this, Heather, throwing these all into the ordinance and then shooting that off to the planning committee, planning commission, either today's Friday, so probably not Friday, not until Monday, right?
Correct, yes.
Okay, great. Other business. Will, do you have anything?
I think, other than, I'm still interested in foundation. I mean, that's something I think we should keep pursuing. And
Identifying some.
well, I talked to the Toledo Community Foundation, which Bowling Greens is umbrellaed under. And I think that's an area that we should look at. The only thing there is it takes money and what you get is the interest off of it. So it's not very substantial to start with. But the Community Foundation does offer grants. And seeing some that they've given in Bowling Green, it seems like we should be able to apply for some grants for something, whether it's studies or specific properties or things. They're not terribly substantial, but it's $5,000 to $10,000 or something.
Now, are you talking about
The Bowling Green Community Foundation?
starting a community?
No,
fund?
no, it exists.
Okay,
And they give foundation grants, like annual grants. They've applied for them. It'll be maybe to the band or choir or the Black Swamp Players. If we saw something where we had a specific need for something, I think it,
So possibly, for example, if we know that we have to do building inventories. That's part of the mission of a Historic Preservation Commission. Maybe we could apply to them for some grant money to help us
exactly.
help, I don't know what, pay some university
Yeah.
students to help us do it or something like that.
When I think one of the commissioners had a comment in about technical advice. Well, that's something else. If we could look at when those grants are submitted, they're annual. So maybe something too that we look at getting a specific amount that's earmarked towards advisement or, there's a lot of professional experience on the commission too to offer advice. I noticed on the land bank or you sent the information, when you looked at some of the things they do, some of them is where they actually go physically make recommendations to owners. So some of us can do that. We got to be careful legally, but I think some of those things can be done.
Will,
No.
would you be willing to investigate that a little bit
Sure.
more and
Yeah.
maybe give us a little report next time?
Yeah.
Would that be okay?
And I probably need to talk to the mayor about the legality of the city having their own foundation. I don't know if that's possible.
Okay, that'll be another future discussion.
Yes.
Great, thank you. Other business. Chris, you have any?
No, well, Heather mentioned maybe, down the road, we have some sort of info session about tax credits. I think that would be really helpful for a lot of people in Bowling Green to understand what opportunities there are. I'd be happy to be a part of that
Great,
presentation, and
Great.
I've got plenty of clients that have finished the process and can provide their sort of insight and support to the
Good.
cause.
And I think we need to continue educating ourselves and also our community on the advantages of having the CLG. We're talking about some resistance from some people, but I think there are a lot of really, really good things that we need to help spread the word about. So
Mhm.
anything you find that you can share with us, that would
Yep.
be great. Okay, so Chris, excellent. We do have a public engagement plan update. Do we have anything to report on that?
Before, well, I guess this sort of fits into that topic. It also fits into the ordinance topic. I think we need to have we need a specific person or persons to finalize a letter to the Planning Commission that responds to some of the issues that were raised that we are not responding to and the reasons why, et cetera, perhaps something on this. So I think maybe you need to appoint somebody to,
Okay,
because she's going to need it by Monday to go with these amendments to the Planning Commission. So there's a time factor, a serious time factor here.
so Les, would you be willing to, you worked on some ideas for this. What do you think? Is that Is that
If-
close to
If the
being,
group wants me to do it, I would do it.
we want you to do it.
Okay.
Would that be agreeable?
Yeah, but
Uh,
you've seen roughly,
I think something,
you've all
something,
seen roughly what I have in
something
mind.
along the lines of what you already have kind of thought
Okay.
through would be great. I don't think would need a lot more additions.
Okay,
I think that would be terrific.
okay.
I think it's well done.
So that's one thing. And another thing is, don't think we need to do this before the planning commission meeting, but we should at least consider whether or not we want to respond to the Mauer family memo to us. And I personally think we probably should. I think we could do that sometime between now and the planning commission meeting so that it was ready to either deliver or to hand out at the meeting itself. I don't think it's something that we can do in time to include with the packet. But so the first question is, do we respond to the Mauer family letter? And if so, who should be responsible for that?
Well,
I was kind of wondering, John.
I just want to thank Mowers and everybody that responded to us. While we may not totally agree with comments, we need to know what the community is thinking and feeling and saying. And I think it's very true that we take those comments very seriously. Nothing is tossed off. We had quite a few comments from the planning commission as well, and we've all been individually thinking about these things a lot.
Yeah.
So they're hard decisions, and it's a matter of, do we compromise the concept of the CLG, or do we keep things status quo? And that's what we're fighting with, and I think we're wanting to move forward with a new plan. Hopefully, it will work, and we'll see. We hope we'll have community support, although we won't have everybody's support. We know that. So, at the very least, I would like to issue a thank you to Bob Mauer and his family, and to other people who have been.
Let me just thank, for taking his comments under consideration,
Absolutely,
maybe even
yeah,
respond later,
yeah,
but just a thank you for the comment.
right.
I mean, it's a little more than that. I mean, I think that, of course, we should do that. That should be part of any kind of response, but it's really a public document. It went to the planning commission, it went to the city council. It's probably known by other people in the city. So I think we need to do more than, I personally think we need to do more than just acknowledge it and say thank you and the positive things that can be said. I think we need to respond to some of the more negative things.
And explanation.
Something in the way of explanation. The family, like a couple of members of the planning commission, 2 or 3, essentially are saying this ought to be entirely a voluntary operation. I think we owe it to everybody to say why we don't think it should be entirely a voluntary operation. And this would be one more chance to do that.
Okay.
Given her work, I think maybe Chris is somebody who could try to develop such a response, because it has a lot to do with the value to the community, as well as maybe some responses to specifics in the letter.
I can create a draft of that.
That'd be great.
John, it's up to you. I'm just suggesting it,
I think it's a good idea.
finding out
And-
if she's willing.
And then if you could share that with us
Yes.
prior to sending, that would be great.
Oh, yeah.
Terrific. Okay. So unbelievably, we've gotten through most everything on this agenda. What do you think?
Did we agree that February 6th, 26th will be our next meeting? I think we decided not to try for one before the city council meeting in February, but
February, what did you say, February 26th?
yeah, is that the fifth Friday of?
I think so.
Yeah, that's a Friday.
Fourth, yep, the fourth Friday,
Yep.
26th.
And
February 26th, is that correct? Correct,
Yes.
Heather?
3 p.m.
Yes. Three PM. Okay, thank you very
so
much.
lobby visitation.
Yes. Did you have anything else?
I was
Heather?
just gonna.
Yeah.
What Les just said.
Okay, the lobby visitation?
Yeah.
Okay, so we will, before adjournment, if there's any lobby visitation, we can have that at this moment. Thank you very much.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Michelle Green, and although I don't reside in the city of Bowling Green, I have put forth a great investment in this fine city. I want to thank you all for taking your time, your enthusiasm, your expertise when it comes to this historic and architectural preservation code. One of the things I think we lose sight of when coming up with new ordinances is the practical side of things. I've lived the practical side. The philosophical side is one aspect, but the practical side is another aspect. This is what I do for a living. This is where my heart, my soul, my finances, my family's future is invested. And I don't know if we can all say that same thing on the same level. I am so impressed with all of your qualifications, Chris, and it's a pleasure to meet you. One thing I do want to say, though, is in 1999, although not in the city of Bowling Green, my husband and I purchased the property and redeveloped it into 14 rental units. That's something we never would have done if we were forced to be part of something like this. You've had 4 meetings lately with developers who are interested in this type of thing, but a meeting does not a project make. When they look at the dollars and cents of these types of things, it doesn't always work out. Again, the practical side versus the theological side of things. I applaud the effort to make this a more beautiful town. I applaud the effort to cease the brain drain. But as an investor in the city of Toledo in a like-minded project, Toledo's still working 20 years. So the tax credit benefits aren't always what they're cracked up to be. That should be a personal decision. That should be a voluntary decision. We've seen numerous projects under our watch fail using this technique. Some have succeeded, others have not, but that should be a personal choice. When you're taking that risk, it should be your choice. Many of the properties that were purchased here in Bowling Green were done so because of the nature of the property, the location of the property, and the long-term viability of the property. If I'm now forced to head in a different direction, that may not make sense. Additionally, the 6th line, the statement of purpose, section 158.02A2, to stabilize and increase property values. I think there's been a letter presented that pointed out numerous properties. My husband and I, my family members have also been involved. 225 East Wooster, Coconut Grove and Church Street complexes. That was a handful of properties that the city had been dealing with forever and a day, and no one would take on. I'm not saying that would be part of a historical district, but if it was, we would never have touched it. The value of those properties would not be stabilized, and it would not increase property values. So what I'm saying is, I think this is a wonderful idea. I applaud you taking the time and effort, and I think there's a lot of great things. I think, obviously, the Historic and Architectural Preservation Code should be altered, and I applaud many of the changes and amendments that you've made tonight. But I stand here before you today, agreeing with multiple others who have had the concern that it should be on a voluntary basis and should be left up to the individual putting their neck on the line, preserving their residence, starting a project, and not to somebody who may not have lived the practical side of things. I thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Appreciate your comments.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hi, my name is Steve Green. That was my wife. I'm a same situation. I live in Perrysburg, but do business and have property here in town. I just wanted to reiterate a couple of things that Misty just said, as well as a couple additional things. First of all, I grew up in Bowling Green. I love the city. I think it's important that we're doing things, working together to bring prosperity to everybody, to help attract businesses and people to choose Bowling Green to make it their home. I think this is a great effort, a great thing to do. However, my biggest concern is just the mandate. Otherwise, I think it's fantastic. I've been telling Les and other people for years, I think it's good to build up these older neighborhoods, get people together to try to improve them. This is a great way to do that. I just don't think it should be forced. I also want to, and this is kind of a side note, but I kind of want to bring up the irony of the city putting together a Historic Preservation Commission just in my last 20 or 30 years. And just sitting here, I penciled down several properties that were torn down by the city. The beautiful old senior high school, torn down by the city. The Civic Center, Armory, and Hanneman Funeral Home that was torn down to make way for a big box CVS right in the middle of our town. The city supported it. City council supported it. Everybody thought that was fantastic a few years ago. The Pop Culture House that the city or the university tore down. The Ridge Street School, beautiful historic building, was torn down. Then I want to point out the projects that our family, I know the Maurer family, these are just the ones on the top of my head. 225 East Wooster, the old Irwin House. We just spent tons of money fixing that up into a beautiful Airbnb. For 3 decades, there was an old boarded up building next to the railroad tracks across from Dairy Queen. We revitalized that. High Point Village, the corner of High Street, 60-unit complex, totally revitalized. Corner of Ordway, Misty talked about that. We fixed, totally rehabilitated that. The Milliken Building, the Children's Home, the First Christian Church. The reason I'm pointing these out is I heard comments this afternoon that kind of made landlords seem like the bad guys. I want to point out all the properties that have been torn down by the city and all these properties that just these 2 families have fixed up during the last couple of decades. The reason we can do that is because we're in control and we have the choice to make decisions when it comes to the rehab. So you just want to be careful. If you mandate something, you want to be darn careful, because if the costs get out of control, it's an issue. And there is cost in engineers and architects and having meetings and getting committees together to get approval for a paint color or for a window or for a mailbox or whatever it is. You just want to be careful with that. So, and that's basically my point. The other thing was something that was mentioned about people moving to Perrysburg. In my experience as a realtor as well, people, most of the properties you're talking about here in the historic area many of them are rentals already. They're already split up. Families aren't going to move into these houses, even if they are in a historic district and work is done to bring them back to a historic level. Families aren't going to move into those houses. The reason people are moving to Perrysburg, there's more amenities in Perrysburg, whether it's stores or restaurants or businesses, housing. I see this all the time. The modern family isn't going to move into an old house that has a small garage or no garage, a basement that's only 7 feet, no closets, small kitchens, cut up design. Those are the choices that people are making young families to go to these newer neighborhoods with newer modern types of houses. And Perrysburg offers that. So you need to consider that too. So anyway, just a few thoughts. So
Okay,
thank you.
Steve, I think we all are appreciative of your work, and you've done some wonderful things, and we don't want to leave with that thought that we're against what you're doing and saying. I don't see that this historic area that we're imagining would be overtaking the whole city of Bowling Green. I mean, right now, if we would go with something like what we have historic, what do we call it, Heather, the current historic districts?
Oh, the National Register properties.
Right. I mean, they're relatively small areas. And
I think it's fantastic.
and I think, I'm sure I know you've done work in those areas, but I know you've done work around town too. And it may change your business a little bit, and I regret that.
Well, I think it's fantastic. Don't get me wrong. I just think you want to be careful with it. If there's any opportunity to make it a voluntary, but whenever you force somebody to do something, the passion isn't there. And especially when it comes to these historic projects, what gets people fired up is their passion. They're passionate about preserving the history, passionate about preserving an old building or a house or whatever it is. If you force a homeowner living along Wooster somewhere to do something, I just don't know that passion is going to be there. And then you have the financial aspect of it as well, and I don't know, just, you got to be careful with that. That's my concern. I love it. I think it's a great idea. I've been telling Les for years, we should get a group of people together, buy houses in these neighborhoods and do this type of thing. I think it's a fantastic idea, but you got to have people, you can't force people to do it. So you just got to be careful with that. That's my concern. So, and I think I don't know, you're walking on the edge of, dividing people and dividing the community. And again, I've just named many, while I was sitting here, the positive things that I've seen groups of landlords do around town. I don't think we want to, categorize all those guys as, the bad guys, and especially when you look at what the city's done the last 2 decades, tearing all these beautiful buildings down.
Well,
So I find it kind of ironic.
Well, we weren't around when that happened, and hopefully we would have had some stop gaps to some of those
And maybe a
buildings.
group like this would help prevent some of
Maybe
it.
we could, and that's the hope, because we're losing buildings. I mean, not every day, but a lot of important buildings are gone.
It's like a lot of it with rehab also is the character that old buildings have. You can't design it cost-wise. You cannot design buildings with the kind of character old houses for old buildings. So it's trying to write something that's appealing to people that want to be in the districts and help the whole city and preserve the buildings. I was on the Colorado Springs urban renewal effort, CURE they called it, back in the 1970s, and we had 3 separate areas in Colorado Springs. We demolished a lot of downtown Colorado Springs at the time through property rights, whatever. But the west side, I mean, it was when we rehabbed. I did the first building there, and then all of a sudden people wanted to come to other buildings. So if you looked at that west side now, it probably looks like Aspen. And when we did it, didn't look too good.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like trying to appeal to people like yourselves to
be a part of it.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, I think this is great. I think it's a great way to preserve some of the old buildings and history and so forth, but my thought is just to be careful with the mandate part of it. So
Good point. Good
thank you
Thank-
guys very much.
Thank
I
you, thank
appreciate
you,
it.
thank you.
Hi there, my name's John Mauer. I appreciate all of your time and that all of you are serving on the committee. Just had, I pretty much agree with what's been said already. But a couple thoughts I'd have is, this is presented as kind of a common sense compromise. This isn't like the last proposal. This is more easygoing. We're not quite as stringent. But when I read the 20-page proposal, there's a lot of language in there that could be stringent. It could be interpreted, give this committee the power to do some pretty strong things. I know when the Nathan spoke, he kind of spoke about why people would object to this and kind of question the motives. And I have to take a little bit of offense to that. I think, I know we already have building inspection and we already submit prints and we already go through a process. And this is kind of like a second approval process that you go through. You need sketches, you need prints, there's expenses, there's fees. It's kind of a whole second process that you're voluntarily going through. So I'm not against historic preservation. And I think to some degree, we've kind of shown that we don't like to tear down buildings. We don't like to alter the community. We want to keep that flavor and we want to keep those buildings as much as possible as well. It's just kind of coming up with something that everybody can live with and agree with. And the other thing that kind of came up that I was curious about was talking about the voting for the districts, for the historic districts. We say property owner, and I guess, I know downtown Bowling Green votes by front footage, and I think you should some careful definitions of how you're voting there. How many parcels are included with the property? Is it per building? Is it per parcel? Is it per front footage? I think you need to be very specific about how you're doing that voting. And maybe I misunderstood, but when I hear it per property owner, does that mean if you own multiple properties, you have one vote? Just curious, didn't quite know if that's how it was intended.
Can you
But-
speak to that, Wes?
It's, Mike Marsh says that as the ordinance is written, that's what it means, yes.
Okay, and I don't know if that's as intended by the committee. I would question the fairness of that myself, but maybe that's intentional. But I know as somebody who's invested in the community and downtown, on West Wooster, on East Wooster, you name it, to then be told that you don't have as much as vote as people who own one house who may not have a large commercial building. I mean, I can't take that anyway, but as being somewhat offensive. But I very much appreciate your time. I'd like to build a document we can all agree on. It's just there are certain parts of it that at the moment I can't completely get on board. But again, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Any other lobbyists? Okay. I think we're at our ending of the meeting. Can we have a motion for adjournment?
Make a motion that we adjourn.
Second.
Okay, thank you very much. We are adjourned.